G'day, Jared from Tyre here, and I've been rolling on the Toyo Open Country AT2 for the last 15,000 Ks, 14,000, 15,000 Ks, and today I'd like to tell you about my experiences with them and what I've been using them for and sort of how they've gone on different terrains. But first, let's bring you up to speed quickly on the Tyre. If you want to know more, we've got a studio review, which we did in the studio. I'll talk about all the different features, but basically these are a medium duty all-terrain. So they're not your most aggressive, they're not the most road oriented, but they're somewhere in the middle. They've got a reasonably open spaced tread pace, and they're a 2-ply sidewall tyre. So I think the theme of today is going to be jack of all trades, master of a few. So let's go for a drive and I'll talk to you more in the car. So let's start off with Blacktop, which is what we're on now. And in the dry, these tyres are great. You can push them. There is a little bit of softness in the corners, but you know, they're an all-terrain tyre and that's what they're for. In the wet, they're good for everyday driving. However, if you push them just that little bit further, then they do start to slide. I went out and did put the camera on for 3 passes around a roundabout in the wet and couldn't actually get it to slip out at that stage, but they will sometimes catch you a little bit in the wet, sort of when you have your inertia more against the tyres. So it's something to be cautious of, but again, as always, drive to the conditions, because it's my job to push these a little bit further. But yeah, something to be conscious of. So on the Blacktop, they're great in the dry. And the other thing on the Blacktop is that they're really quiet as well. So these are probably some of the more quiet tyres that I've actually tested in terms of on all different sorts of road surfaces. So even on that really hard chip stuff, they tend to soak up more noise than a lot of the other tyres that I've come across, apart from maybe a couple, but they're certainly up there. So we're just about to go on to gravel now. And we hit the gravel. And one of the things that I've noticed on gravel is that they're perhaps a little bit floaty. So how does that translate? So around corners, they will tend to not quite hold on as much as some of the other tyres I've driven on, but more than some of them as well. So again, they're sort of middle of the pack when it comes to gravel roads. In terms of stopping, they certainly stop. All the stuff that's in the back of the car has just come to the front of the car. They stop pretty well. I mean, I haven't had to do any emergency stops in this apart from that one just then, but they do grab onto the gravel well. It's just in the corners they tend to have that little bit of a floatiness, and sort of high speed gravel they're okay as well, but again, corners, again, don't push it. Like, they're fine for everyday driving. I'll tune back in a minute when we're on some slightly harder tracks. So now we're on some of the rougher trails, and we're whaling in here because we've only taken a little bit of time out. Woo! And not giving these tyres much of a break, like we're having a bit of a go. And while there is that sort of floaty, vague steering feel still, it's actually coming into its own here a little bit. I mean, we are in a Raptor, so it can handle this sort of stuff pretty easily, but if we, like, there's a lot of rocky nastiness on the ground at the moment, and if we can do this at this sort of speed, then, whoo, it's a hole. Then they're going to be able to put up with a lot of rubbish while driving. You can't see him, but the sound guy, oh, I can't see anything. Fuck. The sound guy's got a hold of the old shit handle. So they will take a fair bit of punishment, is what I'm trying to say, in between gaps when I'm actually trying to concentrate as well. Let's talk in another second when we actually get onto the tracks itself. So then we get onto the tracks themselves, and this is where that comfortable sidewall of the AT2s actually starts coming into its own. I mean, we haven't deflated the air pressure, and let me just put it into four-wheel drive so we don't rip up the tracks. We haven't deflated the tyres or anything like that yet, but it's still nice and comfortable here in the car, and they're certainly holding their own. A little bit of traction control just then. And that's where I think they've got that mix of closed terrain in the centre of the tyre, closed lugs in the centre of the tyre, and then more openly spaced lugs on the outside of the tyre. So it means that they're a good on-road tyre, but they perform remarkably well off-road as well. So I'm just going to cut in here, and you're halfway through the review, but I just want to do a little sort of cut and chip report. This is now post taking the tyres off, and these are the tyres that we had on the car, and this is actually a brand new AT2 over here. So what I thought would be cool to do is to actually do a little comparison. So old one, new one, these ones have got about 15,000 Ks on them, and they're fairly abusive Ks, as you can see from the road that we've just been smashing through. But otherwise, they've been through forward driving, they've commuted to work, lots of fun stuff like that. So I guess what I sort of wanted to look at was how the tread face has actually suffered in comparison. Like, we've got a rock there that's stuck in the tread, but no real, there's not a huge amount of rocks caught in the tread face. Obviously, all of the little nipples have worn off, but that's they probably wear off in the first couple of 100 Ks, if that. But in terms of the actual tread face, there's not a huge amount of cuts and chips. Like, there's a few, but they're certainly not as bad as some tyres that I've seen. So I'd actually say they've held up pretty well. So I actually did some maths on these, which I do every time. So videos, long-term reviews prior to this, if you go and check out the written article, then all the maths is in that, plus extended rants on the tyres or nice things said about the tyres that I've been using. But on this, when I did the maths, we had done 11,580 kilometres on this tyre. We started off, so these tyres in this size start off with 12.9 mil of tread depth. We ended up with 10.4 mil of tread depth, so that was 2.5 mil used over 11,580 Ks. So we're going to get hardcore maths here. So the minimum tread depth is 1.5 mil. So if we were to use all of the tread depth down to the minimum, with my driving, you would get about 52,805 kilometres. So that's perhaps reasonable. Some you will get more Ks out of, but also keep in mind this is my driving. So it's probably best to compare my driving to my driving. And so if you're going back through the long-term reviews, keep an eye out for that, because I'll put that into every single review. So theoretically, I had 41,225 Ks left to go. So the tyres have actually fared pretty well. So I'd be pretty happy to keep running these. The only thing is that, you probably need to look after them a little bit better than I do. This white lettering could probably do with a bit of a clean. A bit of tyre black will help this brown stuff go away. But really, they've been abused and they're fine. So anyway, I'll cut back to previous Jared, who can give you the roundup on these tyres whilst you're still out on the trail. So we're getting into the rougher stuff now, so I'm going to deflate my tyres. And that's one area where the AT2s are actually, they shine for me, because they're only a 2-ply carcass, which is a good thing if you're going on the sand. And there's a little bit of sandy stuff that we've found in the middle of this forest here, so there's no dunes around us or anything like that. But I'm going to deflate the tyres to get into the harder stuff. And I had these down at 18 PSI, which is what I'm just about to actually deflate to now, in the dunes a few weeks ago, and they performed amazingly well. So we actually managed to get lost in parts of the dunes where quads usually only go, and this thing's a little bit wider than your average quad. And we actually didn't get stuck. And I was a bit worried we would get stuck, but we didn't get stuck. And that was only at 18 PSI. So we still had another 6, 8, even 10 PSI that we could have actually let out of the tyres. And so the conformity of the carcass, and we'll overlay some video of it going down to lower pressures, but the conformity of the carcass at lower pressures is actually excellent. And so that's where, rather than a mud tyre or even the Toyo RT, these tyres will be better in that sort of situation. So let's deflate the tyres a little bit down to 18 PSI from the 34 that I usually run in the front, and then we'll tackle this little track. So we've now got 18 PSI in the tyres. Let's have a little hack at this little hill. To be honest, I actually did do it just before with full pressure, but we decided to lower the tyre pressure down a little bit to show you guys. Got it in 4-wheel drive. I did use locker up here the first time, but since then haven't had to. So even though these tyres actually have a fairly close set of centre blocks, they've got wider spacings on the outside of the edge of the tyres, the outside of the tread face, which means that they do actually hook up pretty well on the off-road tracks, particularly once you've deflated as well. So I mean, like I said, we're on 18 PSI now, and that wasn't necessarily a flat out climb, but it was a bit gnarly, and we certainly did it pretty well. So I'll just stick it back here, and then we'll have a last little chat. So I said earlier that these tyres were jack of all trades, master of some, and they really shone for me on sand, because like I was saying before, on the dunes, they really hooked up and they got us out of a not very sticky situation. They shine on the road for day-to-day driving. They're, like I said, a medium aggressiveness all-terrain, but they're really quiet for day-to-day driving, so they don't drive you mad. In terms of dry handling, they're excellent, but in all of the other aspects of their lives, they're good, but not as amazing as some of the other all-terrains that I've used. But when you think about it, a jack of all trades, master of some is actually probably better than some that are actually really aggressive but really noisy as well. So if you think about what you're actually using your tyres for, then a jack of all trades, good all-terrain is probably actually the pick of the mix for 90% of what most Australians do, and even people around the world as well. So these are reasonably tough. I mean, we just put them through a fairly fast little bit of driving, and we were actually a bit worried about getting a flat, and the as I said, the audio guy had both handle and the old shit handle. But again, so they're mild-mannered, but they can handle it as well. So it comes down to what you're thinking about doing. But really, for 90% of Australians and people overseas, hello everyone, this tyre would actually be appropriate. So the Toyo Open Country AT3, it's appropriate. It's a good tyre. Certainly wouldn't hesitate to recommend it for most people out there. But I've just remembered, the whole reason why we've got the AT2 on here is we're just about to put the AT3 on here. So we're doing a back-to-back test of the AT2 versus the AT3. So in about 10, 15,000 Ks, give or take some, I'll be back telling you how the AT3 compares to the AT2. So make sure you stay tuned for that.